Don't perceive vulnerability as weakness. What you're doing is reinforcing your truth that everyone can't be trusted.
Stefanos, Sifandos,
a relationship expert,
sharing his wisdom on masculinity, revealing all of the red flags you should watch out for.
What are some of the red flags that you absolutely should not ignore?
Whatever you value most, if they're doing something that go against those values, they're going to be red flags for you. However, there are general red flags, of course, right? So some of them are just watch how their words and their deeds match up. If they say they're going to do something, do they do it, and how do they do it? How are they with other human beings that they don't know? Another thing that you may look at as well is like, does he use... If he lacks... If you're good with that, great. If you're not, it's a fucking flag.
Do nice guys finish last? Stefanos, so thank you so much for coming on the show. I'm really excited to have this conversation because what I love about your platform is that you're opening the conversation to these really hard topics for men, for relationships. For you, why is what you do important? Why does it matter?
I think it matters for a few reasons. So firstly, it's for me to be a better human. You know, we teach what we need to learn the most. So I'm no stranger to messing up, hurting people, making choices that are not in the best interests of me, my life's path, all those around me. You know, I'm human just like all of us, right? And so I think for me, if I can be really enthralled by deep interpersonal work, then I have an inbuilt accountability mechanism, right? Because I value integrity and I value intimacy and connection and relationships. And therefore, if I have that inbuilt accountability measure, I'm just going to grow as a human being. And I figure that if I grow as a human being, anyone I come into contact with, they're going to grow as well, or at least they get a real version of me. And let me just say that again, that's growth and expansion in that sense is a value for me. And so if so many people are doing that in the world, when people come into contact with me and they're being a greater version of themselves and they have greater, interior accountability, they value growth, they want to be in greater integrity and authenticity, that's only going to rub off on me. It's only going to inspire me because I'm also interested in that, right? And so that's one big reason. I think another reason is that we have a duty as human beings, and this is connected to growth for me, is to be greater versions of ourselves. It doesn't mean that we have to be constantly doing the work and there's no time and space for play or fun or integration. I think that's part of actual growth is fun and play and space and integration. Like take what you've learned, what you've been exposed to, let it settle in your nervous system, be with it psychologically, let new patterns of being and ways of being emerge for you. And then, go back to exploration when it calls, right? So I think we have a duty as humans, as conscientious humans to do that. They're the sort of core reasons why this work is important to me and why it matters. And also most recently, the last couple of years, being a father as well, which is connected really to the first 2 points, right? But specifically for my daughter and for my wife and for all the people that matter to me. And so I just think it's a we thing. I think we as a collective just have a duty and an obligation to be the greatest versions of ourselves for so many different reasons.
Yeah, I relate to that a lot. I think I've learned more about myself doing this kind of work, doing the podcast, talking to other people as a therapist, as a healer, than I've learned and grown any other time in my life. I mean, I was in therapy for years and I've just done more growth, being able to be of service to others. And as a mom, as a parent, you know how it is. Like you learn a lot of shit with your kids. So I can definitely relate. When you think back on your childhood, what do I need to understand about your background to understand who I'm looking at today?
Oh, that's a great question. I had a very, and this is probably one of the reasons why I have an extreme-ish personality or personal disposition in my life, why I value range, particularly in men. But I had quite a turbulent, volatile, tumultuous, unpredictable, uncertain childhood where there was love. Love really existed, and I felt that growing up
Mm-hmm.
in various ways. And I even felt that from the people that also were dishing out abuse. I grew up in a very violent, emotionally abusive and physically violent environment. And part of it was my culture. I have a Greek Italian or Greek Sicilian background, and the fieriness, the passion, which can extend into boundaryless, unhealthy, self-bridled expression in terms of violence and shouting and abuse and judgment and criticism and all of that. That can just become a natural extension, and it becomes the norm in an environment growing up like that. And so, from an attachment perspective, I experienced a disorganized attachment and formed a disorganized attachment, and that carried over into my adult years as well. And as Dr. John Demartini says, our voids become our values. And so, what was really missing in my life, connection and intimacy, and just safety and certainty, like just some level of predictability. I simultaneously craved that growing up or being an adult, but I also simultaneously craved what was familiar, which was chaos. And so I created chaos for myself. I lived in the shadows. I was my addiction was, or my addictions were, if I had to sort of sum them up in a triad, it was food, adrenaline, sex, right? And as a kid, it was more food. Then as I became older, it was food and adrenaline. As I became older, it was food, adrenaline, and sex. And, if I need to be honest, food is still can be a crux for me, right? In terms of it becoming this emotional reliance, right? Because I've really come to greater peace with the adrenaline piece and at greater peace with the sex piece. And what I mean by that very specifically is I needed novelty and variety, and I needed it consistently. There was a compulsion and addiction towards that. And so the more women that I could be with in a sexual way, the more validation I received, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when I say that pattern has really rested in me, that's the part. I'm not saying I'm celibate and I don't like sex and I'm not into that. It's my relationship to it has changed deeply. And that's been many, many years, like many, many years. And so, those early years growing up where I didn't have a sense of freedom. And so the sex for me as an adult was connected to that. It's like, well, I can do what I want, how I want, when I want. I'd be in an intimate relationship, craving intimacy and connection genuinely. And then also at the same time feeling constricted because of what I witnessed in the dynamic between my mother and my father and the enmeshment I had with my mother and how she communicated to me as her eldest son about not wanting to be in the relationship and all those things that stack and stack and stack. Right. And thinking, well, that's not what, my original sources of intimate relationship was my parents. And then all my friends at that time in the neighborhood who also came from ethnic parents like Croatians, Italians, etc., Yugoslavs, their parent dynamics were the same. And so I was witnessing all these parents basically being like my parents were. And I'm like, oh, this is what marriage is. And so part of me wanted intimacy and connection. But then the other part was like, whoa, no way, I don't want any of that. And so the way I would deal with that, instead of being transparent and honest in a relationship with my partner and asking for non-monogamy or sharing with her what my requirements in relationship are, what my requests are, or whatever, I'll just do everything in the shadows. But that became addictive in and of itself. So it was a combination of adrenaline and that sex, right? A peak experience, essentially I was looking for a peak experience. And instead of going to heroin or cocaine or drugs per se, substances, I went to that. Everyone's different. Everyone has their own dispositions, right? And so the unwinding of that was many, many years in process and progress.
It's almost like I'm listening to my life in a different perspective and a different lens. Like you, I grew up in a very dysfunctional household. My mom's Brazilian and Palestinian, and in her culture, the way she grew up, that was the norm. The yelling and the screaming, the physical abuse, that was just how discipline was given. And maybe they had less resources, it's just different times, right? And sure. I grew up with a very disorganized attachment style, just like you. I wanted the intimacy, but it also kind of freaked me out. And when I learned to have autonomy, I learned to have autonomy through my body, through sex, through seduction. all of which didn't serve me. And it took me a long time to learn to do things more effectively. But I think there's a direct correlation with how we attach to our caregivers and what we see and what we think is familiar and normal, and how we gravitate towards relationships as adults. So let's get into that. So when we talk about healthy relationships, how do we foster stronger connections? Because I feel like in this day and age, it's getting harder and harder to just connect. What are your thoughts around that?
Knowing yourself is the first step. Knowing the facets of yourself that really matter in relationship. And I'll go back to what I said originally around growth being a prime directive of being human. That's something that I personally value. And not to imprint on every single person on this planet, but I think it's one of the core reasons why we're here as humans is to grow. Right. And so being deliberate in your self-exploration, being intentional and being attentive to the inner workings of you know, your patterns, your love strategies, your relational strategies. How do you function in conflict? What are you avoiding in intimacy? What are your core fears? What are your pain points? How do you get upset and angry? Do you shut down? Do you shout at people? Do you try and dominate? Do you hide from the world? Do you manipulate? Like really understanding yourself, cultivating and developing deeper compassion and non-judgment for yourself and for others. And then from that place, you bring that level of authenticity, that level of honesty, that level of integrity, that level of genuineness in the relationship that then contribute to meaningful conversations, meaningful conscious communication, agreements that are forged based on a true sense of yourself, right? Requests and requirements, like you know what your non-negotiables are in relationship. You know what you want. You know that you want to be in a relationship. You know that what you're a stand for. You have healthy boundaries. You know what you'll say no to. So all of the self-awareness piece and the self-exploration really are foundations for self-love, deeper sense of self-worth, a deeper sense of this is who I am. I love and trust who I am. I'm going to bring that to the relationship because you deserve that. You don't deserve a masked version of me. You don't deserve a fake version of me. You don't deserve me to tell you what you want to hear, but really I'm in the background developing resentment because that just doesn't serve me, but I'm just saying it because I'm a people pleaser, like really, really knowing yourself, your shadows, your lights, your dreams, your aspirations. And then from that place, you can also discuss and you can open up to deeper intimacy, your intimate fantasies, your ideas and thoughts, and your utopia for being in a relationship. And knowing yourself and then having done a deeper level of inner work, you're more prepared for disappointments. You're more prepared for rejection. You're more prepared for disagreements and conflict. And you don't live from a wounded, adaptive child place. You live from a healthy, mature adult place. Now you're not perpetuating your partner's reactivity. They're not perpetuating yours. Or at the very least, those dynamics are lessened. They're dulled down. They're not so fiery and intense. And now you're living from a more healthier place, a more mature place.
So for you, with somebody who is going through that disorganized attachment, wanting the intimacy, but also being scared of it, again, I relate to it. For somebody that's listening, that's going through that and who wants to connect and wants to be in a relationship, but then maybe they run from it or they get overwhelmed from it. What are some key things for you that helped you to start to change those dynamics of feeling more safer to get closer and to be more vulnerable?
Yeah. And, and some people may not understand disorganized attachment style. We hear avoidant, we hear anxious or insecure. We don't hear too much about the disorganized. Maybe another way to say it as well, just for greater relatability, is if you have a propensity towards creating chaos in your life or living in chaos and living in volatility and the unknown and uncertainty, it could be coming from that, but it just also could be stemming from unresolved, unprocessed trauma. So I just thought I'd mention that could be useful to understand. In order for us to truly hold an ability to cultivate more vulnerability and be real in the presence of others, we have to have lived experiences of being met with without being shamed and without being judged, and being deeper appreciated and loved for who we are as we are, being met as we are, not needing to be changed, not being asked to be different, not being judged for how we show up in the world. And so you have to create circumstances and surround yourself with people that can actually really see you, hear you, understand you, appreciate you, respect you. And that can be friendships as well. It doesn't have to be intimate romantic partnerships. But we have to have those lived experiences where people are going to challenge us in healthy ways, and where we can have disagreements, right? And we can have high risk conversations and high risk communication. In other words, high risk could mean you're going to say something that you're seeing in a friend of yours that you want to call them forward because you're seeing a behavior that you know doesn't serve them, and you have agreements and you have a relationship where you can share that. But there is a risk of, if you're saying something that's going to hurt that person or could be hurtful to their ego, then it could escalate, right? It could, and you may lose the friendship. So you have to have high risk conversations and then come back to love and have examples and experiences of that. Your nervous system needs to experience that, because most people that live through a disorganized attachment style or that are accustomed to chaos don't trust people. So you've got to relearn to trust again. You've got to relearn to give yourself to people again, right? And then another way as well is, start low, start slow, start with the low hanging fruit, ease into it. So if you're in a relationship or you're building friendship or you're building intimacy with someone, because intimacy presents itself in so many different ways, right? Like it could be sexual intimacy, it could be emotional intimacy, it could be physical intimacy, like non-sexual. It could be, sharing a deep appreciation for art is a form of intimacy. Being co-parents or parenting is a form of intimacy as well. There's so many different forms of intimacy, right? So start low, start slow. So, lead with vulnerability. So start low, start slow, and lead. Lead with vulnerability. Say something that is a little risky, but not too risky, right? That doesn't feel too big, or share that with someone and watch them open to you, and even be extra vulnerable in the sense of saying, hey, this is a difficult thing for me to say, but I want to share it with you because my intention is to be closer with you. Just transparent, right? So you're setting an example of how you want the relationship to be as well. I value transparency. I value being real in a relationship. Here's what I'm going to say to you. And again, it's a lower risk. It's a low hanging fruit. It's not like you just found out you were in a meditation and you found out yesterday, you realized yesterday that you were sexually abused when you were 7 and it's less than 24 hours and now you're going to share this thing with someone. That's a big thing, right? Generally speaking, that could be a really big thing. It's going to be something else that maybe you've already worked through but still is a little sensitive, right? So just to give you a more tangible example, it could be, you've been working on the bullying that you experienced growing up as a 12-year-old, 13-year-old, and 14-year-old, and you've been the last 2 years really working on that with your therapist, and you feel like you're at a place now that, it feels a bit heavy and big, but like the majority of that heaviness is gone. So you're going to share it with someone, right? I'm just giving you an example, but you'll know what feels low risk to you, but that's a good starting point as well. And also one more thing I'd say to vulnerability is don't perceive it as weakness. This is mainly for men, but just people in general. Don't perceive vulnerability as weakness. If you look at it through that lens, then you're never going to open up to people, because then all you're doing is reinforcing your story or your truth that everyone can't be trusted. That's not true.
So when we're talking about vulnerability and masculinity, because I think that a lot of people have the lens of masculinity being, you're not supposed to be vulnerable because vulnerability is being weak. And if you're weak, you're not masculine. What is your take on masculinity and how do you define that? Is it different than the lens of what society views as masculine versus what masculinity really is? What is your take on that?
It's an interesting question. I don't subscribe to telling anyone or a man how to be a man or defining masculinity. I have, I guess, objective parameters for me with respect to what masculinity is and what masculine characteristics constitute. In terms of vulnerability and masculinity, I created a model called vertical vulnerability. And the premise of that model is really about teaching us as men, and I really did it more for myself, right? Where's the balance point between shutting down completely and being too scared to speak your truth right? Or too scared to connect with someone, or too scared to be viewed a particular way. So you orchestrate the way that you're seen in the world. And then where the other end of the spectrum is where you're way too leaky with your vulnerability. And it's coming from a wounded place of victim or needing attention or needing to be loved and cared for and felt sorry for through your hardships or through the difficult things that you're sharing and whatnot, right? And so there's a middle way, there's a middle path. I think the Buddhist system, Buddhist philosophy, and it's not the only system, of course, that looks at this, but the middle path, there's something to be said for that. And so with vertical vulnerability, if I look at men specifically, and I look at part of the masculine paradigm, men need men. And masculinity evolves in the presence of other masculinity, whether it be healthy or unhealthy. That's how it will grow or expand. Its sense of self will compound, right? And so my rule for me when it comes to vulnerability is, and it's not a hard and fast rule, but my framework is, if something comes up for me or rises to the surface of my own awareness that is uncomfortable, I want to sit with that. I want to be with that by myself in solitude, not isolation and loneliness. There's a difference. I'm being very intentional. I want to be with it in solitude. I want to be with this and in nature, maybe. I want to really work with this. I want to, with the tools that I've picked up, gathered over the years, whether it's stillness practices, whether it's breath practices, whether it's other Eastern mystic practices, whatever it may be, right? I want to be with that. If I'm still stuck with it after a period of time, and you may say, well, how do you know? Like, well, the more you know yourself, the more you know yourself, and you'll just know, basically. But if it's still affecting your life and you're not making any headway on it, you go to the next step, and you have a band of brothers, men that you trust, whether it's a men's group, a men's circle, friends, physical, biological brothers, people that you trust, men that you trust that you can bring an issue to, and they can give you a reflection. They can give you a vantage point beyond yours. They can help you see the forest through the trees. And you may say, well, what if men don't have men they can trust, which many men don't? You've got to create that for yourself. You have, that's an absolute priority in your life as a man, is to have men that you can trust. And then what you're going to do is you're going to bring that to your partner once you've really processed that, right? And once you've got a deeper hold on that. So you're going to be vulnerable. You're going to share your process. You're going to share what's going on, but you're not sharing from an immature, unprocessed, volatile place. Now, the next thing one may say is, well, that's polished vulnerability. That's not real. You're not being raw with your partner. You're tidying it up, and then you're bringing it to your partner, right? And my response is this. If you go to the first step, there's no hard and fast rules to this, by the way. This is more for people that are always outsourcing their power. That's why there's that sit with it first yourself. But you may actually sit with it for a few seconds and then take it immediately to your brothers, to your brethren, and let them see you raw and unprocessed. And the other part to that is, if you have an agreement with your partner and you believe her feminine and her masculine and her womanhood can hold your rawness, and you guys have an agreement around that, fantastic. Bring it to your partner. If you're always doing that, I think that's a problem. If you're always, polishing up your vulnerability to bring to your partner, I think that's a problem too. That's why I said they're not rules. I said rules, but they're more frameworks. So these are just guiding posts. Like, get in the habit of having a system like that, where there are checks and balances, so to speak, that are better than the current, not just the current, but just the current socioeconomic system, where we say we have checks and balances in the US, but we don't, because we're so much debt. Anyway, side note.
Yes.
so these are real checks and balances that can work, right? That can actually work for you. So they're not hard and fast rules, but they're ways to get to know yourself in deeper ways. And as your relationship develops and grows with your partner, you'll know when to bring what to her, in which way and how, and the timing of all that, right? It's all exploration.
Yeah, that was beautifully put. What about for people who are single? Let's switch gears a little bit, because I hear a lot and I see a lot. And listen, I've been there in the past. I'm not immune to this, where I used to choose men who were either emotionally unavailable or the ones who were emotionally we'll say intelligent or on that level, I at the time, not anymore, but at the time I would kind of find them as like the nice guys or boring. Do nice guys finish last or are they winning?
Depends where you sit. Do nice guys finish last, or are they winning? It really depends where you stand on that. Ultimately, when we speak to the nice guy syndrome, we're speaking to a wound, we're speaking to a shadow, we're speaking to an aspect of self that derives validation, acceptance, value, and worthiness from others. So that's external validation. And so their strategy is, let me be super nice and let me be super liked so that I'm not rejected, that I'm not abandoned. And ultimately, they're not dealing with an unprocessed, unresolved wound of maybe abandonment from childhood, or maybe harsh criticism, etc. Or maybe they learned that to keep themselves safe physically in their environment, at home, at school, whatever it was, is if they were nice, the chance of them getting beaten or getting hurt was lessened. And so now this carries over. And so when we're speaking to the nice guy, we're not speaking to a human being that is kind and generous and so forth, that comes from a healthy place. When we say the nice guy, we're really referring to someone that's wounded. And so from that perspective, a nice guy's always going to finish last. If you're living from your wounds and your shadows, you're always going to finish last, full stop. If you are genuinely cultivating care and happiness, care and kindness for others, while also looking after yourself and being connected to your truth, then one may say you're always going to win. And just because it's painful, or there's sadness, or there's difficulty there, or there's a rupturing or a tear in the fabric of the intimacy or relationship temporarily, or even a little more permanent, you're still winning if you're being in your truth and you're also practicing kindness towards others. I mean, that's one of the hardest things, right? Is to love fully in non-attached ways, and to be really present and empathize to the needs of others, while also, maintaining your own integrity and looking after yourself. What's one of the hardest things to do, because it often is met with conflict. It's often met with, well, if I do this, that's going to happen. And if I prioritize that person, I minimize myself. If I prioritize myself, I minimize that person. So finding that, it's not a balance, but finding your way through that in every circumstance is challenging.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point with the point of like, are you coming from a wounded place? I feel like me back then, I would be a little bit bored with that. But at 38 years old now, almost 39, for me, when I think of like emotional intelligence and somebody being able to be vulnerable and emotionally open, and also understanding that emotional availability does not mean, or emotional vulnerability does not necessarily mean they're emotionally available. You need both, right? I have found that to me now is more attractive than the chaos, than what I defined before as masculine. My definition and view on masculinity has changed. I have a question for you though, because I feel like I have a lot of clients, and I put myself in this pot, that there's a lot more women that are highly educated now. There's a lot more women making their own money, that are becoming financially independent, financially wealthy themselves, that find themselves in this single space and having a difficult time finding someone that they're attracted to for multiple different reasons. They can't find a financial peer, they can't find someone on their level. Do you feel like dating now in modern society is getting harder based on like some of the clients you've worked with, or are we getting more pickier?
Is dating getting more challenging in the world we live in, or are we as individuals getting more pickier? I think it's both, and it really depends on where you sit. If you're someone that's doing your inner work, if you're someone that's really growing in the relationship and in your life, then I think you're going to be more pickier. You are going to definitely be more selective with who you bring into your world. You're going to say no a lot more than you say yes. And that's a good thing. And those that are stuck in their shadow, or those that are still living from fear and contraction in their wounds, they're going to want to say yes to everything. But in saying yes to everything, you're saying yes to nothing. And you're also just living from your wounds. So you're perpetuating patterns that no longer serve who you want to be, who you are, who you want to become. Right? And so from the perspective of, if you're doing your inner work, and you're living from a healthy disposition, dating may be a little more challenging compared to what it used to be in terms of volume of people, but it's definitely going to be more selective. If you're living from a place of fear and contraction and you're unwilling to meet yourself in new places, then dating is going to be way more difficult because you are going to end up being more disappointed. You are going to have more dates and meet more people that are aligned with older versions of yourself and not who you're becoming.
Yes.
So you're in this constant internal tug of war. That is not pleasant. That makes life way more difficult. And what do we do to compensate for difficulty and pain and confusion and frustration? The greater the pain, the greater the pleasure we need. And if we're unresolved in our constitution, if we're still living from a wounded place, guess what we do? We're going to look for pleasure in the quote unquote wrong places. We're going to look for pleasure in places that are connected to our shadows. Could be drugs, could be partying, could be workaholism, could be you name it. And so the answer to your question, I think, is both.
I see a lot of toxic relationship dynamics, and we see it a lot on TikTok now about narcissism and narcissist relationships. But a lot of people find themselves stuck in these relationships that they just can't seem to, and I'm not talking about physically abusive relationships or emotionally abusive relationships, but just the dynamics of toxicity, which in itself is abusive. But a lot of people find themselves stuck in these relationships that they just can't seem to get themselves out of, or they keep falling for the same type of person or same type of relationship. What is your advice to somebody who is in a relationship right now that just can't seem to get out of these patterns and they keep ending up in the same types of relationships? How does somebody start to break these patterns?
If you're the type of person that is ending up in the same kind of relationship and you're regretful and resentful and you're not enjoying the dating experience and you're not enjoying being in these relationships and you're attracting the same kind of person over and over again, but just with a different face and a different haircut, stop dating for a minute. Just stop dating just for 3 months, 6 months. But don't just stop dating. Be deliberate in what you do when you stop dating. Yes, you can practice forms or expressions of celibacy, but more importantly, work with a therapist, work with a coach, immerse yourself in reading, look at the patterns that are playing out in these relationships, look at the kind of people that you're attracting. You can do your own research here, but I would definitely recommend working with someone. Join a men's group or a women's group. Depending on you know what your dispositions are, and you may have some awareness of your patterns and your addictions and your compulsions, you know, join a group that can support you in that. Do inner work around these issues. Look at your attachment styles. Look at your personality patterns. Look at your upbringing and your wounds. Look at your personal dispositions. Look at your addictions that you just have in general. Look at your lifestyle, your patterns, your habits. Really spend some time on you, but not in a hyper selfish way, but in a way that you can then be of greater value to yourself, to those around you, and to the world. I would pause dating for a moment, have a break, because there's probably an addiction in and of itself there, right? Or compulsion there, because there's a pattern there around that, and just spend some time getting to know you in a deeper way so that you can attract from a different place.
Mm. When you're dating somebody from a man's perspective, I'm curious to see your answer on this. I see a lot of people who, and I'm just going to use women in this example, that stay in situationships without having a commitment in hopes that it'll turn into a commitment despite getting that. For a man, do you feel like at what point does a man know, in may just as an estimate, that this is a person he wants to be with versus a girl that he's just having sex with?
If you're staying in a situationship and that's a pattern in your life, that's definitely coming from a place of low self-worth. It's definitely coming from a place, and I say definitely, I shouldn't be absolute in the term definitely, but more than likely it's coming from an unworthy place. If you keep attracting the same kind of relationships over again where you're not being met. Yeah, how soon does a guy know that he's actually going to commit to someone as opposed to just having sex with them? It's very different for every individual because it's based on their own personal value sets and dispositions, their own characters, what they really, you know, how they do love, their love strategies. Yes, it's true that there are biological differences in the way men and women mate, if you like, or connect or create intimacy in their lives. And you've then you're layering on top of that the individual's history, the individual's upbringing, the individual's exposure to any trauma, how their nervous system has interpreted their own life and what they've made that mean. And then you've also got societal inputs as well, and societal expectations and cultural expectations. So for men, if they, it really depends on who they are as an individual. And you can maybe bucket people. We can cluster people into different buckets just for generalization to make things understood a little easier. If you fall more in that, say, narcissistic bucket, and again, there's so many shades of narcissism, but let's just say high expressive states of narcissism where you're highly self-absorbed, your universe is the only one that matters. And as a result of that, you've got unprocessed trauma, low self-worth. As a result of that, you've gone to more extreme degrees to mask that. You're probably going to use and abuse partners. You're not going to be interested in a long-term relationship. You're more interested in a trophy partner. You're more interested in validation. You're more interested in hard and fast. You're more interested in things that don't involve deeper levels of commitment and deeper levels of intimacy and exposure to that within you by being in a longer-term relationship, right? If you fall into the bucket of really low self-worth in the sense of, and you've become a recluse and you've sort of minimized your value and you're sort of hiding from the world, and you'd be considered what's called a quote unquote beta, which that all that terminology is very loaded, but you may go really fast into a relationship. It's like, whoa, when am I going to get another relationship again? Let me just hang on to this one, and then you're a people pleaser and you're insecure and all those things. And so it just really depends what bucket you're in. I can't say that, if you put a gun to my head and I valued my life and you sort of said, make a decision, I'd say that most men are going to be further away from clarity in terms of making decision on a long-term commitment than women would be.
When did you know because you're married, right? So at what point did you know that this is a person that I want to commit to?
Byproduct of inner work. Like, it's as simple as that. Like, I knew I was ready to commit with clarity that I'd never experienced prior to that moment, based on quite a number of years of very deep inner work. But there's no secret source. Like, I know people want to hear, oh, what was the 3-step program that you did, or the 3 steps that you took? It's do some fucking hard inner work. Like, get on the floor, cry, scream, change your habits, detox from the poisons that you're putting in your body. Like, you've got to do the hard thing. Like, it's as simple as that. There's no real secret to it. It's just do the thing that you need to do, the thing that you've been avoiding, that you need to do that's good for you, that you're not doing. Just do that thing. And then you'll start to be a different person. And you've got to surround yourself with people that are going to support you on that journey. If you want to quit heroin, you're not going to shack up in a fucking smack house. You're just not going to do that. Because, especially not at the beginning, because all you're going to do is be tempted to go back to smack. So what do? You've got to distance yourself from the environment that stimulates that need and activates it more and more, or that perceived need. And so it's the same with when we're trying to make changes in our lives. You may have to make changes in your friendship circles as well, if they're not going to come to the party with where you want to go and where you want to be.
But he treats me like his girlfriend. We've been together for 12 months and he's not committing to me, but he treats me like his girlfriend. What do you say to that?
He treats me like his girlfriend. Does he treat you as if you are his girlfriend?
Well, I'm just saying there's a lot of, yeah.
I know what you're doing. I'm responding back. I know this isn't about you.
He treats me like his girlfriend, and we have intimacy and we spend time together, and I've met his family, but he's not my boyfriend. So maybe he'll change his mind.
Do you want him to be your boyfriend?
Yes.
Have you spoken to him about that?
Yes. He says that he's just going with the flow. He's going with the flow. He doesn't want to rush.
Is that genuinely good for you? Like, do you feel at ease when you hear that?
No, I feel like I'm walking on eggshells, so I don't want to keep bringing it up.
And what does walking on eggshells remind you of?
With my parents, probably.
So you maybe have some unresolved stuff with your parents, because our intimate adult relationships are extensions and reflections of our primary caregiver relationships, our core relationships. And if they're unresolved, we're going to keep attracting circumstances that are very similar to those circumstances of past, so that we can have a redo. And if you're doing the same thing, which is acquiescing and being compliant and giving your power away, then you're just going to get more of that. And so, as difficult as it may be, and I say this with such love, grace, and compassion, the best thing you can do for you is leave this relationship, because you're not actually getting what you truly want and desire. What you truly want and desire is to be claimed, is to not be owned and not be claimed as property, but for that man to say, I got you. I'm in this.
Mm-hmm.
I want you. I'm super clear on that. And you're not getting that. So why are you settling for less?
Preach. And that's, I think a lot of people, they're not getting clarity, but they're hoping for it. And it's like when you're living in this idealistic view of what the relationship can be or what you hope it's becoming, you're living in a reality that doesn't exist and may never exist. And I know that's hard to hear, but I mean, shit, I've been there. And I've seen people waste years of their life to just end up with nothing. And then the next girl that he's with, he ends up marrying her or ends up in a long-term relationship. And it's shitty. But I think that if we look at I always ask, like, what were the red flags? They were probably there, or they were yellow flags. Something was there.
Yeah.
When you think about, like, from a man's perspective, working with people with relationships, what are some of the red flags waving in someone's face that you absolutely should not ignore when you are dating somebody or in beginning phases of a relationship?
It's a great question, and it's really subjective. So when we ask the question, hey, what are some red flags we should be able to see when we're first dating someone? Whatever you value most, those red flags, if they're doing something that go against those values, and everyone holds different values, they're going to be red flags for you. However, in saying that, it's not me getting out of the answer or the question or the exploration, because there are general red flags, of course, right? So some of them are just watch how their words and their deeds match up. Watch how their words and their actions match, and their actions and their words. So if they say they're going to do something, do they do it, and how do they do it? And if they do something, how do they then talk about that? How are they with other human beings that they don't know? You know, the classic example is you're at a restaurant together. How does he treat the waiter, as an example? Right? Like when you're out in public, like how does he look at other people? I'm not asking you to psychoanalyze him in these deep ways. Just notice in your body what's happening. When he's communicating with you, the things that he's saying and how he's saying that, how does that land in your body? Because sometimes red flags, orange flags, yellow flags don't have to be a very distinct thing or action that someone does. It could just be something that you're feeling in your body. Now, then you may say, well, yes, but what if I'm coming from fear and not intuition? Whole other can of worms. However, still start in your body. Another thing that you may look at as well is like, who is friends? And is he okay with you meeting his friends? Does he use secretive language? Because, you know, the people that let me go back to the friends piece, the people that you spend time with are often an indication of who and how you are in the world, right? Does he use secretive language? Is he open? Is he proactively vulnerable? So if he's very hidden in his language, that may be an issue, right? If he's not asking questions, he's talking a lot about himself and answering all your questions or somewhat answering your questions, but never really curious about you, that could also be a flag, right? If he lacks drive, if he lacks ambition, if he doesn't look after his body. When I say, and ambitions are I'll come back to ambition in a moment, but if he's purposeless in his world, if he is displaying too many feminine attributes, if you're wanting to be more in your feminine and you're with a man that is also a great deal in his feminine, that could be a problem. If you're happy to be in your masculine, then you're going to need a feminine man. You're going to need a man that's more in his feminine or has a big access to that at least, right? That's where the personal values conversation piece comes in. Yeah. The ambition piece, spectrum, extremes. If he's overly ambitious, problem, potentially, right? Because at what cost is that ambition coming at? Hyper competitiveness, hurting other people. If he completely lacks ambition and just, free spirit flowing through the world, nothing wrong with that, but you've got to be okay with that. There genuinely is nothing wrong with that, right? Like that's where his life stage is at the moment. He may be like that for the rest of his life. I have a dear friend, who many years ago, she lives in Indonesia. She met this man many years ago. They had a very short relationship, few weeks, but she became pregnant. And she's like, hey, I'm keeping this child. This means something to me. I know we're not anything right now of substance, but I really want to keep this child. Long story short, she had the child's beautiful. She's an amazing mama. Love her to pieces. She was at my wedding, just tears in my eyes thinking about her. She's such a beautiful human being. But the father of the child is a very wounded man, and he can't show up for his child, and he can't show up for himself, and he's just, you know, they met in Bali, so he's just a free spirit. He's here, he's there, he's got no money. He sometimes has money. He doesn't, like, he's just, if you're good with that, great. Bring that into your life. If you're not, it's a fucking flag. Doesn't matter what color it is. It's a flag that you don't want pitched in your front yard.
I'm giggling, but it makes sense. At what cost is what you have to ask, right? Because, you know, sometimes the same things you're attracted to can be the same things that are not compatible. Like, I'm sure on some level, she probably was attracted to the free spirit. Plus, in an environment like Bali, you feel more free, right? But the reality of it, and this is why I try to remind myself as well, is that lust is great, chemistry is great, but what's beyond that? Compatibility, you have to assess that. That actually takes time. You need to see, how do you fit in this person's life and how do they fit in mine? Can I create space for this person? Can they create space for me? Are we able to mesh our lives together? Because listen, I love a free spirited man, but I'm ambitious. Like, you got to be a peer. I like to travel. We need to do things, and that's not going to work for me. So at what cost? Makes total sense. When you think about your past, is there anything that you would tell your younger self? Would you do anything different with the knowledge that you have now that you didn't know before?
Oh, would I do anything different? Would I do anything different as a young person with the knowledge I have now that I didn't have then? I mean, the answer is yes and no, meaning I'm at a point in my life where I can really, for the most part, I can really embrace where I'm at, irrespective of how uncomfortable it is. And, you know, I'm in some uncomfortable transitions right now, you know, and I love where I'm at the same time. But what I know now is that, I know this sounds cliche, and I don't say it from an intellectual place. At least I don't feel that. I say it from a more visceral place. Like, it's all going to be okay. Like, a lot of the things that I did and didn't do, the masks that I wore and took off and put other ones on, like, it was from a place of, I'm not safe in the world. I'm not, this isn't going to work. And what I'm making this not working mean is that I'm not enough and I'm unworthy and I'm, you know, filling the blanks. Just to, I have a greater sense of self-worth now than I did back then. And I see that as a healthy thing. It means that I'm growing, you know?
Mm-hmm. I love that. Steph, thank you for your time and your energy and sharing your story. And thank you for the work that you're doing, and also the work that you're doing for yourself, because I think that without that, you wouldn't be able to be of service to others. And it's so important to be a model in the world of masculinity that is lacking in so many men's lives. And I thank you for doing that work and for showing up and just continuing to be authentic. So thank you so much. And before we cut out, is there anything that you're working on or anything that you would like to share with everybody listening and where they can find you?
Yeah, thank you for that. I appreciate that. Working on a couple of different things. You know, every month we have a beautiful event called Breathwork for the Feminine. It's a 3-hour somatic immersive breathwork, live coaching, somatic practices. It's live in person, live streamed and recorded. We'll be in London July 7th. It's going to be a pretty big event. I'm excited about that. We do that every month. It just happened to be in London in July, the month of July. And then attached to that as well is a beautiful community membership, which is called Safe and Seen. So you can go to safeandseen.us or .us, safeandseen.us, and find out more there as well. And if you want to work with me in a one-on-one capacity, coachwithsteph.com. And my social media channels at Stefanos Sifandos.
And we'll link everything for everybody. So if you guys want to contact him or if you're interested in the breath work, we'll link it below. And Steph, thank you again for coming on the show.
Of course. Thank you so much.